Okay, so this is the first video um, of, of maybe one or two on prior restraint on the right to travel, which would be a form of unconstitutional action by the government as it relates to mandatory statutes, mandatory adherence or implied consent to statutes that work to restrict the freedom of travel, the right to travel in the conveyance of the day and choose your own mode of transportation. So we're on that topic again, and this is called prior restraint on the right to travel, a totalitarian tiptoe towards tyranny. So we're talking about New York as being the first state that was required vehicle registration in 1901, actually. And initially, owners were responsible for creating their own license plates, displaying their initials. So Massachusetts followed up in 1903 and became the first state to issue official plates. And the federal government didn't get involved, didn't play a direct role in the initial implementation of license plates because it was primarily a state level responsibility. But the state-by-state approach essentially reflected the decentralized nature of transportation regulations in the United States. And each state was developing its own systems and requirements for vehicle identifications and registration. So, like I said before, the initial law didn't provide for state-issue license plates, but instead, vehicle owners were required to display their initials in conspicuous places on the back of their vehicles with letters at least 3 inches in height. And basically, it was a DIY approach that led to a variety of different solutions, creative solutions by owners, with owners using materials such as leather, wood, and metal to craft their own identification plates. And some even painted their initials directly onto their vehicles. The legislative intent, let's talk about legislative intent behind New York's 1901 law regarding equal rights for motorists. So the legislative intent behind New York's 1901 law was a crucial aspect of the bill, reflecting the complex social and legal challenges posed by the rapid adoption of automobiles at the turn of the century. Prior to 1901, right, automobile owners faced a lot of discrimination and restrictions on their use of public roads. Local authorities often favored horse-drawn vehicles and viewed automobiles as dangerous and disruptive to the established order. Okay? And this bias had manifested itself in various ways, such as arbitrary bans, discriminatory speed limits, unequal right-of-way, excessive fines and penalties. Some localities imposed disproportionate fines on automobile owners for minor infractions, and viewing that essentially as a way to discourage their use. Could that be what's happening today, but even more on a mass scale? So this 1901 law, which aimed to address these inequities by establishing a statewide framework for automobile use, these provisions included things like uniform access. So the law prohibited local authorities from banning automobiles from public roads. So again, the law prohibited local authorities from banning automobiles from public roads. Prohibited local authorities, ensuring that motorists had the same right of access as other vehicles. They also set reasonable speed limits for vehicles, for automobiles, 8 miles per hour in cities, 15 miles per hour in rural areas, and below which local authorities could not go. So local authorities were not allowed to set a speed limit that was low. They had to set a speed limit that would be reasonable for these vehicles and basically prevent unreasonably restrictive local ordinances. Okay. So also equal treatment. The law mandated that automobiles be treated equally with other vehicles in terms of right-of-way and road use regulations. So state-level oversight. By centralizing registration and regulation at the state level, the law aimed to prevent discriminatory local practices, which, says it all. So the legislative intent to establish equal rights for motorists was not just about convenience for automobile owners. It was a recognition of the automobile's growing importance in commerce and personal transportation. So both commerce and personal transportation, guys. The law sought to balance the interests of all road users while acknowledging the inevitable shift towards motorized transport. By ensuring these protections in state law, New York legislators were taking a progressive stance, anticipating the future dominance of automobiles and laying the groundwork for their integration into the existing transportation infrastructure. So this forward-thinking approach set a precedent for other states and helped pave the way for the widespread adoption of automobiles across the United States. The evolution of license plate regulations from their original intent in New York to their current implementation reveals a significant shift in purpose and impact. The primary goals of New York's initial license plate legislation were to 1. Establish equal rights for motorists on public roads, 2. Prevent arbitrary restrictions on automobile use by the local authorities, 3. Create a uniform system of vehicle identification for safety and accountability, and 4. Adapt legal frameworks to accommodate new transportation technology. These objectives aimed to protect motorists' right to access public roads while implementing a basic identification system. The focus was on integration and fair treatment of a new mode of transportation. So it wasn't about restricting the mode of transportation, it was about increasing its viability. But modern license plate regulations, guys, have diverged from these original intentions in several key ways. License plates and vehicle registration have become significant sources of revenue for states. Fees often exceed the actual costs of administration, turning what was meant to be an identification system into a revenue stream. The system is now used to enforce a wide range of regulations beyond simple identification. No one will argue with that. Failure to comply with registration, insurance, or other requirements, failure to consent, right, can result in severe penalties, including loss of driving privileges. Advanced technologies like automated license plate readers have transformed license plates into tools for mass surveillance and data collection far beyond their original identification purpose. Okay. So rather than ensuring equal access to roads, the current system can effectively restrict access to for those who cannot afford fees or comply with complex regulations, disproportionately affecting lower income individuals. The simple identification system has evolved into a complex bureaucratic process with numerous rules, specialty plates, and additional requirements that can be burdensome for vehicle owners. Let me read that again. The simple identification system has evolved into a complex bureaucratic process and additional requirements that can be burdensome, essentially, for. So disregard what I said there about specialty plates. But that is an aspect of it as well, because you can turn the display of a specialty plate into an argument, a constitutional argument, as it relates to prior restraint. But getting back to this vlog, so the shift represents a departure from the original legislators' intent of protecting motorists' rights and ensuring fair access to public roads. Instead, the current system often prioritizes revenue generation and regulatory compliance, sometimes at the expense of the very rights and freedoms the original legislation sought to protect. Today's governments have skewed heavily towards prioritizing their own interests in safety and accountability, often at the expense of citizens' rights. The original balance sought by early legislators, protecting both public safety and citizens' rights to use automobiles, has largely been forgotten or ignored. The initial regulations were partly designed to balance the rights of horse-drawn vehicle operators with those of automobile users. This justification is now entirely obsolete, and states now impose increased restrictions on automobile use as if somehow a reasonable need exists to allow horse-drawn vehicle operators to share the roads and highways. The original intent is being ignored, in essence, in the name of public safety and welfare. There's been a gradual but significant shift in how road use is perceived. What was once seen as a right, the ability to transport one's property privately on public roads, has been increasingly treated as a privilege that can be revoked or restricted at the government's discretion. The focus has shifted from enabling and protecting citizens' use of the roads to extensively regulating and controlling that use. This shift often ignores the fundamental right of citizens to freely move their private property on public thoroughfares. So today, in this vlog, we are diving deep into this controversial and often misunderstood aspect of American law, and it is the constitutionality of mandatory license plate requirements as it relates to prior restraint. So this discussion is not merely about a piece of metal on your vehicle. It's about fundamental rights, the limits of government power, and the essence of freedom in America. For decades, we have accepted the idea that government can require us to display state-issued license plates on our vehicles. However, what if this requirement is actually an unconstitutional infringement on our rights? What if, in the name of public safety and law enforcement, we have allowed a system that effectively criminalizes the exercise of our fundamental right to travel? Let's break this down step by step, examining the legal principles at play and challenging the assumptions that have long gone unquestioned until recently. First, we must establish the foundation of our argument, the fundamental right to travel. The right to travel is not explicitly stated in the Constitution, as I've stated previously in different videos, but it has been recognized by the Supreme Court as a fundamental right protected under the Privileges and Immunities Clause. This right encompasses more than just leisure travel. It includes the freedom to move between states, seek better opportunities, engage in commerce, and exist as a free citizen in a free country. While courts have recognized this right, they have also allowed significant regulation of the means of travel, particularly concerning motor vehicles. This raises critical questions. Is requiring a state issued license plate truly a neutral regulation, or is it something more insidious? Considering the concept of prior restraint, typically we think of prior restraint in terms of free speech, government actions that prohibit speech before it occurs. However, could we apply this principle to the right to travel? By requiring citizens to obtain and display a government-issued plate before they can legally use public roads, isn't the state imposing a prior restraint on travel? Supporters of the current system might argue that license plate requirements are content-neutral regulations necessary for public safety and law enforcement. However, we must examine this claim closely. On the surface, requiring everyone to have a license plate seems content-neutral, but by demanding a specific form of government-issued identification, the state is effectively compelling speech. It forces citizens to display a government message, to carry and exhibit proof of compliance with a system they may fundamentally disagree with. Furthermore, the enforcement of these requirements often leads to a troubling outcome, the criminalization of noncompliance. When the state punishes individuals for failing to display the required plate, it is not merely enforcing a traffic regulation, it is converting the exercise of a constitutional right into a crime. By choosing to travel without the state's permission slip prominently displayed, a citizen can be pulled over, fined, arrested, and entered into the criminal justice system. This raises the question, how is this fundamentally different from arresting someone for speaking without a government-issued permit? Now, let's address the counter-arguments that we might get. Proponents of the current system will assert that license plates are crucial for law enforcement and public safety. They will point to the necessity of identifying vehicles involved in crimes, ensuring proper registration and insurance, and maintaining order on our roads. While these are valid concerns, we must ask, are license plates the least restrictive means to achieve these goals? In an age of advanced technology, are physical plates truly the most efficient way to identify vehicles? Could there be an autonomous way of identifying vehicles? Could we achieve the same goals with less intrusive methods that do not require citizens to constantly display government identification? Additionally, we must consider the disproportionate impact of these requirements. For many Americans, particularly those in low-income brackets, the cost associated with vehicle registration and plate renewal can be burdensome. While financial hardship leads to lapsed registration, individuals can find themselves trapped in a cycle of fines, legal troubles, and an inability to legally drive, effectively restraining their right to travel. This brings us to the broader implications of license plate requirements, guys. By enforcing these regulations through criminal penalties, the government is not merely regulating behavior, it is imposing a system that can severely limit individual freedom. The penalties associated with noncompliance can lead to a loss of employment, inability to access essential services, and a diminished quality of life. In conclusion, the requirement for state-issued license plates raises significant constitutional questions that warrant serious consideration, and the enforcement of these requirements can be viewed as a prior restraint on the fundamental right to travel, effectively converting the exercise of that right into a crime. Modern regulations often fail to consider or protect the rights of motorists against arbitrary or excessive restrictions, which was a key concern of the original New York legislators. So this evolution represents not just a departure from the original legislative intent, but in many ways a reversal of it. Where the original laws sought to protect citizens' rights to use new technology on public roads, current systems often restrict those rights in favor of government interests and revenue generation. The balance has tipped decidedly away from protecting individuals' rights and towards expanding government control and revenue streams, all while operating under the guise of the original safety and identification purposes. As we navigate the complexities of modern governance, it is essential to critically examine the balance between public safety and individual freedoms. The conversation about license plate requirements is not just about regulation, it's about the very nature of our rights as citizens and the extent of government authority in our lives. Thank you for joining this important discussion. It is crucial that we continue the question and challenge the systems that govern us, ensuring that our rights are preserved and protected for the future generations. Thank you.